to publicly release its human rights report, a series of human rights reports. We are calling it compendiums. And this first one is called Crushing Dissent. And without any further delay, I invite Indian American Muslim Council's National General Secretary, Muhammad Jawad, to make his comments about the compendium and release it. Then we will, subsequently, we will have our esteemed panelists make their remarks.
Thank you, Rashid Bhai. Assalamu alaikum all. Hello, everyone. It is my honor to release today's Crushing Dissent, the 2021 status report on human rights in India. This report has been meticulously researched and put together by Indian American Muslim Council, of which I am the General Secretary. I thank Mary Lawler, UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defender, as well as Father Cedric Prakash and Teesta Setalwal, both of whom are renowned human rights activists from India, who have for decades risked their life and liberty to fight for the rights and freedom of the marginalized and discriminated social and religious minorities, for joining us at the release of this compendium. In its last 18 years of existence, Indian American Muslim Council has produced many reports on violations of human rights, civil liberties, and religious freedom in India. But this is the first annual status report from the organization that makes it even special. This report has been compiled over months with dedicated researchers and writers toiling and burning the midnight oil. We will circulate this report widely among various stakeholders, including the US Congress, as well as the various arms of the US government, such as the Department of State, the National Security Council, and of course, the White House. We're also going to share this with the renowned think tanks, the US academia and research community, and the civil rights activists and NGOs. As we all know, the persecution of India's social and religious minorities, including the Dalits, the Adivasis, the Muslims, and the Christians, has sharply worsened under the nearly 7-year-old rule of Narendra Modi as Prime Minister. While his first 5 years from 2014 to 2019 saw mass violence against Muslims in the form of lynchings, his second tenure that began nearly 2 years ago has drastically escalated the level of intensity of prosecution of violence. The revocation of Article 370, which was a violation of India's constitution, has been used as a pretext to carry out mass violations of basic and fundamental rights of the Kashmiri Muslim people, thousands of whom continue to be in prison without any charges. The families of many of them do not even know where their loved ones are. For months, there was no internet in the Kashmiri Valley. The police and the security forces continue to kill ordinary innocent civilian Kashmiri Muslims on the false pretext of terrorism. Then, the Citizenship Amendment Act of December 2019 unleashed a whole level of state-backed violence against millions of citizens, most of them Muslims. In one day alone, the police in Uttar Pradesh killed 20 Muslims who were protesting the unjust and unconstitutional law. From December 2019 to February 2020, there were unending violence against Muslims, culminating in the riots of Delhi, which were wholly one-sided, and Amnesty International and other global watchdogs has established the Delhi police was openly complicit in them. As we speak, thousands of civil rights activists as well as ordinary protesters are in prison in India. All of them arrested on false and bogus charges of violence, despite overwhelming evidence of their innocence. Sadly, the Indian judiciary has failed to rise on the occasion and appears to be abdicating in its responsibilities of delivering justice without bias. Today, leading Indian intellectuals, lawyers, activists, and political leaders are in prison only because they oppose the Modi government's unjust policies and criticize the Hindu nationalist ideology that is clearly behind the anti-minority violence. The rise of Hindu nationalism has also seen a rejection of the fundamental constitutional principles of secularism and multiculturalism. The assault of Muslims in the name of fake and bogus issues such as love jihad, beef, and religious conversation is now officially government policy in many states. More and more, we see that the Indian courts are siding with the government and the police in such bogus cases than giving just a fair order. In this backdrop, our status report, Crushing Dissent, assumes a critical significance You will find this exhaustive report's coverage of all aspects, from the sedition laws, the hate speech, to national security legislation and the criminalization of protest. From the questions on the independence of the judiciary to the dilution of labor laws and the universal health policies, demonstrates how the Modi government is set to undo decades of positive and progressive work in India. I look forward to hearing from our esteemed guest on various aspects of this decline in India. Thank you and warm regards. And now I'll show you the compendium, which we will eventually release it to everyone and share it with all of you. Let me just share it and show you the compendium. Okay. You can see, Rashid, you can see, right?
Yes.
So this is the compendium we have basically, which we're launching it today. As you can see, the title says Human Rights in India Status Report 2021, Crushing Dissent. Inshallah, we will actually release multiple compendiums in future. We're planning to do that, but this is our first of the series. We have electronic copy, and we will also like to print and give it to anybody who wants a copy. But it has all the details in it. I think it has all the facts, and you can go over it. And once we distribute to you, I think it is very hard work from a lot of people. Like I told you, basically, and it has a lot of details, and it's real facts. Basically, it's not like some hearsay or some newspaper articles. This is real say, talking to the people on the ground, getting input from everybody there, and actually documenting those. So inshallah, we will give it to all of you, a copy. I'll send the link to you later. I think, Rashid bhai, anything else to add on?
No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Jawad bhai. Thank you for releasing it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, what Muhammad Jawad mentioned was that this was our first annual report. We have not been doing such reports because there were other organizations, many of them who were doing it. We have Tista here. She has done tremendous work. Her organization has tremendous work. Father Prakash and Amnesty International and other similar organizations. But now they're, especially like Amnesty International, Amnesty India, you all know they had to close their offices, their operations. So now the people who used to work on this space are unable to do their work properly. So we thought we thought we would try to fill as much gap as possible, and that's why we are focusing on these reports. It is a testimony, or it is it is telling that we are sitting in America and trying to report the human rights violations in India, where people living in India themselves can't do it for obvious reasons. This compendium very clearly, elucidates why. So that's one of the reasons we are doing it now, and we will continue to do it. We hope organizations and human rights defenders in India, when they do this, hopefully the Indian government does not crush them. Crushing dissent seems to be the norm in India now. So thank you very much, Jawad, for that executive summary of the compendium. And now with that, I invite Mary Lawler. She is currently the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders. She is appointed for a 3-year term from May 2020. She is the founder and former executive director of Frontline Defenders and former director of the Irish branch of Amnesty International. Mary helped draw up the EU guidelines on the protection of human rights defenders adopted by the Council of European Union in June 2004. She is an adjunct professor of business and human rights in the School of Business of Trinity College, Dublin. She holds a first degree in philosophy and psychology from University College Dublin and postgraduate degree in Montessori teaching and personal management. She is an Irish citizen. She sits on the advisory board of University College Dublin Centre of Ethics and Norwegian Human Rights Fund. She asked me to skip mentioning her honors and awards. They are listed in her Wikipedia. She resigned from a number of boards when she accepted her UN role. With that, Mary, please. You're on mute, Mary.
First of all, may I say how happy I am to be here with you and to congratulate you in person on the tremendous comprehensive report, which I can just imagine must have taken an awful long time and an awful lot of blood, sweat and tears to get it out and ready. So I congratulate you on that. And I'm very happy to see Tista because I remember when I was director of Frontline, we took up your case. And of course, it's lovely to see Father Cedric again. I only met him for the first time last week. But there you go, such is life. We keep banging into each other. So I'm, as I said, I'd like to address the situation a little bit of human rights defenders in India, because that is what my mandate is about. It isn't broader than the situation of individual human rights defenders, and I take a very people-centered approach. For me, it is the bravery of the human rights defenders who are struggling against all the odds. And in India, this is particularly true, for the rights of others that drew me to set up Frontline Defenders to try and help protect them. And I'm really glad to have this opportunity now as Special Rapporteur to do what I can. I should start by saying there is very little a Special Rapporteur can do. Basically, you can do communications, you can talk to governments, and I think that is where the added value will be. And I plan to, and obviously talk to human rights defenders. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of human rights defenders since I've taken up the mandate, but from now on, I am going to concentrate on the most marginalized human rights defenders. The most vulnerable, women, LGBTI, those living in remote areas, those fighting corruption, defenders with disabilities, and those affected by extractive industry and such like things. Because I just can't physically get around to all the organizations that ask me to come and say something. And to be honest, you all know much better than I do apart from that. But in the months since taking up my position, I've sent 6 communications to the Indian government. And these letters are all sent together with fellow special procedures, mandate holders, and they have conveyed our concerns on human rights issues in the country. And my contributions to them have focused on allegations of violations on the rights of human rights defenders and the broader environment for defending human rights in India. Governments are given a 60-day period during which they are expected to reply to the concerns that the rapporteur raises. Unfortunately, however, the Indian government has thus far responded to only one of the letters I've sent since taking up the mandate. And this is very disappointing, and it's also counterproductive because, you know, the protection and support of human rights defenders on the national level is crucial to maintaining resilient, accountable democracies that fulfill their human rights obligations. And I hope to be able to speak to the Indian government in person at some time, and also to have ongoing dialogue with the permanent mission in Geneva. I want to work with governments, and I want to engage fully with governments to see how better how together we can better protect human rights defenders. And I urge the Indian government to engage fully with the mandate as we work towards the achievement of this goal. And this is very important because the level of information I'm getting into the mandate indicates, and I knew this anyway, that there is a very concerning deterioration of the environment for defending human rights in the country. And states have a responsibility to ensure a safe and enabling environment for the defense of human rights. And it's an ongoing project and it needs to be embraced by states. And a lot of it has to do with, at least some of it has to do with legislation. And India is a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And it has an obligation to ensure its domestic legal system is compatible with the covenant. However, we've seen several prominent pieces of legislation, as you document, would appear on paper and in practice to undermine rights contained in the covenant and the work of human rights defenders. So, for example, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act provides one example. Amendments made to the Act in 2019 granted greater powers to the National Investigative Agency in counter-terrorism activities, allowing it to designate individuals as terrorists, despite the definition of a terrorist act not being precise and not being concrete. And, you know, defending human rights is not terrorism, and we need to get that message out over and over again. And this fails also to comply with the principle of legal certainty. And this has opened up the Act, which was already being used to target human rights defenders, to greater abuse. And in 2020, it continued to be applied against human rights defenders with the extremely damaging effect of conflating, as I said, the defense of human rights with terrorist activity. In June 2020, I raised this issue with the government through a communication concerning the arrests of 11 human rights defenders involved in peaceful protests against the Citizen Amendment Act. However, this communication has gone unanswered. And of course, a further example is the arbitrary detention of Father Stan Swamy, who was taken into custody in October and whose case I have raised along with the government, raised also with the government. And as you know, he's accused in the Bhima Koregaon case, under which 15 other human rights defenders have been jailed since 2018. And I'm going to call out their names because I think it's very important that the names of the people that have worked to uphold the rights of others should be acknowledged and should be put out there in the open. So forgive my pronunciation, but here we go. So I call on the Indian government to release Surendra Gadling, Rona Wilson, Sandir Diwali, Shoma Sen, Manish Raut, Sudha Barajwaz, Gautam Nabhaka, Vernon Gonzalez, Aaron Ferreira, and Varavara Rao, and also Anand Teltum and Hani Babu, and also Tatiyaro Gorke, Ramesh Muralidhar Gaikar, and Jyoti Jagtap. These people should not be in jail. They are our modern day heroes, and we should all be looking to them and supporting them and demanding their release. Legislation has also been used to restrict the work of human rights organizations. In 2020, the special procedures, including myself, raised concerns as to the restrictive application of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. And here we're still waiting for a response. And the act which my predecessor and other rapporteurs expressed severe concerns about in the past continues to be used to harass groups deemed critical of the government or too vocal on human rights issues, restricting space for human rights defenders and often constituting retaliation against them for their legitimate, and I emphasize legitimate work. India is a member of both the UN Security Council and the Human Rights Council. It is required to uphold the highest human rights standards. Yet in October 2020, the High Commissioner herself was forced to speak out against the limitations being imposed on civil society and the work of human rights defenders by these and other restrictive pieces of legislation. The situation is very serious. There are many human rights issues in the country which I have not discussed here as they do not fall within the mandate given to me by the Human Rights Council. These include issues of discrimination, access to justice, particularly in Jammu and Kashmir, and economic, social, and cultural rights. However, it is my belief that the issues faced by human rights defenders and women human rights defenders also provide a mirror for the broader human rights situation in a country. I am growing into my role as Special Rapporteur, and I plan to do all I can to support human rights defenders in India. And I hope that the government will accompany me in these efforts going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that encouraging message, and we are with you on that. Anything we can do to support you, please reach out to us. And if at all possible, if you could share those letters to us for Indian government, we appreciate it. Now, with that, I invite our next panelist, a long-time friend of Indian American Muslim Council, Father Cedric Prakash. He is a human rights activist and a Jesuit priest. He is based in the city of Ahmedabad in Western India. He is the director of Prashant, the Ahmedabad-based Jesuit Center for Human Rights, Justice and Peace. He was named Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, one of the highest French civilian awards, acknowledging his commitment to the defense and promotion of rights of all in India. Father Prakash has also been awarded numerous other awards. The Kabir Puraskar conferred on him by the President of India for his work in the promotion of communal harmony and peace in 1995. The Minorities' Rights Award by the National Commission for Minorities of the Government of India in 2006. He was one of the recipients of Mother Teresa Awards for Social Justice in 2013. The award we are most happy to be part of is the Rafi Ahmad Qadwai Award presented for his humanitarian work by my organization, the Indian American Muslim Council, USA, in 2003. Father Prakash, please.
Thank you, Rashid Ahmad, the Executive Director of the Indian American Muslim Council. It is a great occasion to be here, though the content of this webinar is not at all very, very pleasant. But I feel privileged to be here with our UN Special Rapporteur for the Human Rights Defenders, Mary Lawler. We were together on just a few days ago on another webinar regarding Father Stan Swami. And of course, my longtime colleague, and with whom we have worked so much together, Pista Setalwad. Thank you, Mama Jawad, and also Ajit Sai, the ones of the Indian American Council, who are here this evening, and the many others who have joined us, not only by Zoom, but on YouTube and on Facebook Live. Thank you. I've been asked to focus on Father Stan Swami, and Mary Lawler has just spoken about this great man, Father Stan Swami. This is, I'm not advertising for Indian Currents, but this was the cover story of one of the magazines in the middle of October. let's say he's a fellow Jesuit. I am a Jesuit, and the one who did the invocation yesterday when the President of the United States was sworn in, Leo Donovan, is also a Jesuit, formerly President of Georgetown, another good friend working with the Jesuit Refugee Service. We are all Jesuits. Has the Society of Jesus, who runs several of the very important and prestigious universities there in the United States and other parts of the world, we have definitely a commitment to education. But for the last many years, especially from what we call the General Congregation 32, we as a congregation of men within the Catholic Church have taken a vowed commitment to accompany the poor and marginalized in their quest for a more humane and just society. I was studying in the university in Bombay, and as part of that, we used to go for our training to a Jesuit-run center in Bangalore called Indian Social Institute. And that's where in the early 70s, in late 60s and early 70s, I first encountered Father Stan Swami. He was a young Jesuit priest, but even at that time, he had a particular vision, a tremendous commitment to serve the poor. Later on, he was part of the Jamshedpur province. He left becoming a trainer there. He was training lots of people on social analysis, on the cries of the poor of India, even at that time, late 60s and early 70s. And finally, he went back to his home province, that is Jharkhand, and started identifying with the Adivasis, the tribals. For the last many years, and particularly for the last 35 years, he has walked the talk. While many of us Jesuits and people of the church have been very, okay in our comfort zones, Father Stan has been there identifying himself with the Adivasis, the indigenous peoples of Jharkhand. He ate with them. He sang with them. He danced their dances. And he believed that their culture, their customs should not be denigrated or relegated in any way. For him, all over the years, the Adivasis were paramount, their life. There is a phrase we have in Hindi, and many of you would understand this, except those, Jal, Jungle or Jameen, water, the forest, and the land. And we have for the Adivasis the Forest Right Acts, but over the years, governments, in collusion with vested interest, very especially those who deplete the forests of the precious resources, like the mining mafia, the timber merchants, whoever it is, we're busy trying to destroy the forests and take away the resources. Of course, Father Stan Swami was in their midst, and he was there. He was trying to fight with the innocent Adivasis who have been jailed for no reason, just because they have been trying to prevent the powerful from destroying their lands, fighting for the release of more than 3,000 tribal youth, and plenty of other things, struggling for them, accompanying them in their legal battles and so on. Bhima Koregaon, which Mary referred to, took place on the 1st of January 2018. And on the previous day, there were lots of Dalit activists together with some legal luminaires and other human rights activists who met at a place for a meeting called the Elgar Parishad. Next day, they went for the 200th anniversary of the uprising, of which the lower caste had against the high caste people and so on. And suddenly there was violence. All information that came in at first stage blamed people from the ruling regime, from the Sangh Parivar, that they were instigators, they began the violence. But over a period of time, in 2018 and so on, There's many names that Mary read out, including Stan. There are 16. Beginning August 2018, they started first investigation, interrogated, and being arrested. Father Stan was also interrogated a few times over a period of time. But in October, in that first week, he was interrogated for almost 15 hours. Nothing was found against him. The one accusation they were making about him was that he was at the Elgar Parishad and the next day he was at Bhima Koregaon. Father Stan states unequivocally and without faltering that it's a blatant lie on the part of the National Investigating Agency who are interrogating him. He does not know where Elgar Parishad is and he's never been to Bhima Koregaon. Okay, on the 8th evening, they called him to a police station in Ranchi, where his base is, and in a matter of time, they took him into custody. He had practically nothing with him. Next day, on the 9th, they flew him out to Bombay, and immediately he was incarcerated in the Taloja jail. On the 15th of January, many of us got together to observe 100 days of his incarceration. Father Stan was the most recent arrest. Some of them have been languishing in jail for more than 2 years now, like Sudha Bharadwaj, Vernon Ferreira, Arun Ferreira, Vernon Gonsalves, Anand Teldumde, and many others, the names which have just been said by Mary. Okay, he goes to jail. And the first days are very tough because even that little bag that he took with him, because he had no idea he was going to be arrested, was taken away from him. There was his voter ID card. There were, a little straw. He suffers from Parkinson's disease. His hands shake. Fortunately, he has been, in the end, he was given a separate cell with a kind of a Western toilet because in India we have these Indian toilets, which becomes very difficult for an 83-year-old man. Let me say at this stage 3 things. One is, why is Father Stan arrested? Father Stan is arrested, as Mary has just said, because like the other 15 and like thousands of others, this is only in one case called the Bhima Koregaon conspiracy case. They have been arrested for some kind of imagination of some people that they are kind of terrorists, they are anti-national, planning to overthrow the government, and some of the most ridiculous allegations are made on these people who are intellectuals, who are lawyers, who are academics, who are human rights defenders, poets, dramatists from across the spectrum. And like Father Stan, their only crime is that they were accompanying the poor and marginalized on what we call the rights guaranteed in the Constitution of India for justice, for liberty, for equality, for fraternity, for the fact that as people who have been deprived all these years, they have a legitimate reason and in fact a right to be able to access what is rightfully theirs in a nation where the rich become richer and the poor become poorer, or those who are exploited continue to be exploited. That was my first point. The second is the law UAPA. Beginning yesterday, many of us are part of a consortium of more than 100 platforms, networks, and organizations that have organized this consultation, a national consultation on the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Yesterday it went for 3 hours, today for more than 2 hours, tomorrow is the final day. On Sunday, we have a book on one of those incarcerated. that is going to be released, the woman called Sudha Bharadwaj. On the 15th, we had 100 days. It's a whole movement. And the key hashtag that we have is very clear: repeal the UAPA. It is draconian, it is anti-people, it is anti-constitutional. And what happens in the UAPA? There have been case studies, case after case, where people have been saying that ordinary people are languishing. If those who protest about something, there are hundreds of them all over the country, and it has been proved that over the years that there are hardly any convictions. The point is, you cannot even get bail. Father Stan is 83 years old. He has physical infirmities. There is no evidence so far. And there is another man whom Mary referred to called Varavara Rao. He's there. He's very sick. The court has allowed him to be in hospital, but still he has not been granted bail. So the UAPA is draconian. It is anti-constitutional. It is anti-democracy. It is anti-people. And it is targeted against human rights defenders. It is targeted of those who accompany the poor and the marginalized in their quest for a more humane and just society. And it is targeted against the poor, the Adivasis, the Dalits, those who belong to the fringes of society. That's my second point. And the third point that I would like to make, and that's my final point, is where do we go from here? And that's important. I think when we have the discussion with Ajit Sai, I'm sure he'll look into it. This compendium, which has been released, as Mary has just said, with a lot of sweat, toil, tears, hard work, labor by the Indian American Council, is definitely a step in the direction, in the right direction. I think so. It is no use. I think, Mary, it's good that you have a conversation with governments, with the Indian governments. But the point is, are they ready to listen? Are they ready to change? Now we have hundreds and thousands of farmers today in the cold of Delhi. They have been there from the 25th, 26th of November. And they want those 3 laws which are anti-farmer to be repealed. The government wants to do some tinkering. And now they say for 1.5 years, we will not put it on. But the farmers are demanding that they repeal it. So what we definitely want with this anti-people and this, the government is siding with the rich, with the corporate sector. Almost anything that helps these sections of society and which, in a way, feathers their own nest and which helps them maybe stay in power once you have a very unhealthy nexus between, a certain political regime and the corporate sector. It becomes very sad. And this is not all corporate sector, I must admit, but this is some key ones which we all know about. So having a compendium like this is important. Knocking, as Javed said at the beginning, at the doors of those who are concerned about what is happening in India, is important, giving them this compendium and so on. And I think what we need is, I'm very clear, today human rights, just as trade and commerce affects the whole world, and we are doing trading. So human rights is universal. India is a signatory of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It definitely, we believe in the sovereignty of every country. But when we have webinars like this with people from all across the board, I think we have to knock at the doors of people with conscience all across the world to be able to tell the government of India, is enough. Enough is enough. I want to end just now with a little note which Father Stan Swami sent from his prison early in the year. It's a poem. He has been scribbling little notes and sending it out through others. Father Stan Swami says, may the new year bring a new awakening to all of us. May the new awakening light a new flame in our hearts. May the new flame help us discern truth from untruth and hold fast to truth. May truth embolden us to speak truth to power and to be ready to pay the price. When we speak truth to power, we will have to pay the price, but it's better to do it now, visibly and vocally, than to be in our comfort zones and to cover ourselves with a carpet thinking that we will be safe. India has gone a long way in mainstreaming injustice, exploitation, dehumanization, the destruction of democratic values. It is high time it stops. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Father Prakash, for that passionate plea for all of us to do more. And we are committed, as you know, and we will amplify not just Father Stan Swami, but everybody else. You have our assurance on that. With that, Jawad, could you please play that video of former Senator Ree Leon?
Recent events in the United States demonstrate that even the most powerful world leaders can be held to account for abusing their power. It is time the international spotlight was turned on Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the activities of the BJP and the RSS. We need to build global awareness of the human rights abuses and indeed crimes against humanity occurring under the current Indian regime. Sadly, the notion that India is a great secular democracy has become a cloak to conceal the extent of the injustice. The fair and just foundation that India's judiciary, parliamentary and education systems were built on is being extensively eroded. The development of a fascist infrastructure in terms of passing discriminatory laws, neutralising judges and cultivating a BJP-controlled police force is at an advanced stage in India. Legislation similar to the 1930s discriminatory Nuremberg laws on issues of citizenship and marriage have been passed by state and federal parliaments where the BJP dominates. Since Modi's 2019 election win, the BJP have stepped up their pursuit of a Hindu nationalist agenda. During this time, there have been an increase in attacks on the rights of minorities. Most Indian Muslims face great hardship. They have to contend with increasing discrimination when pursuing an education, at work and in wider society. New citizenship laws target Muslim communities. The Modi regime is also under fire for exacerbating the oppression and discrimination of Dalits, Advasi and other marginalised groups. Treatment of India's 200 million Dalits, the lowest caste under the Hindu system of social stratification, has been described as India's hidden apartheid. The people of Kashmir also urgently need our support. Their livelihood, their very future, is being decimated because hundreds of thousands of Indian troops occupy their land. Nelson Mandela often spoke of the importance of international solidarity in winning his freedom and defeating apartheid in South Africa. Now is the time to speak up for the restoration of the human rights for all Indians. Thank you.
That was former federal Australian Senator for New South Wales, Lee Rhiannon. Her name is Lee Rhiannon. She is former Australian Senator. Now I will invite our next panelist, You all know her very well. She has been also a long friend of human rights and Indian American Muslim Council. Teesta Setalwad. She is an Indian civil rights activist and journalist. She is the Secretary of Citizens for Justice and Peace, an organization formed to fight for justice for the victims of 2002 Gujarat riots. CJP, Citizens for Justice and Peace, is a co-petitioner seeking a criminal trial against Narendra Modi and 62 other politicians and government officials for alleged complicity in the Gujarat riots of 2002. Teesta Setalwad, as you all know, is also a very well-known and prolific writer and speaker, and more than anything, she is on the ground. She has done a lot of work, whether it is Gujarat or now that it is Assam. There is so much we can talk about her, but I won't take much time. But before I invite her, I would like to thank Teesta Setalwat for all the help, guidance, and facilitating our human rights report. It wasn't easy. We needed her help a lot, and thank you very much for that, Teesta, for your help on that. With that, Teesta, please. You are on mute, Teesta.
Thank you so much. A very, very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of us today. Ma'am Mary Lawyer, Father Cedric Prakash, Ajit, Mohammad Jawad Saab, Rashid Saab, and of course the Indian American Muslim Council. We are on the eve of India's 71st Republic Day, which is next Tuesday. And it is an important day for all of us because it's the day that we gave ourselves the Constitution that was founded and remains founded on principles of equality and non-discrimination. And yet how far we have come from that ideal which we gave ourselves and we promised ourselves. I want to particularly congratulate the IAMC for bringing out this comprehensive compendium, which looks at a wide arena, a very comprehensive arena of rights violations, right from sedition law to hate speech, attacks on journalists, national security legislation, criminalization of protest, and of course, all of it is right there before you. So much has been said and so much needs more to be said. Responding to Ma'am Mary Lawyer and Father Cedric Prakash, I mean, one cannot say enough about Father Stan Swami. To us at Sabrang India, my web portal that I co-edit, he was a particular friend. He wrote so passionately about the issues of Jharkhand and whether it is him or Sudha Bhardwaj who have been incarcerated under an unjust law, there is just not enough that can be said. However, I'd like to move to some other issues because so much has been said about the UAPA, and like I said, not enough can be said. But we are at a stage. We are at a stage in India where a democratically elected majoritarian government, and I wouldn't like to call it nationalist anymore, I'd call it supremacist or majoritarian, actually wants to misuse its powers of being elected and the power of being elected in a majority to actually pass laws which make a mockery of democracy, which actually are laws not to protect human rights and further equality and non-discrimination, but to do the contrary. And I think we need to examine this phenomenon of this particular government as many other majoritarian governments. Along with the UAPA, which cannot be criticized enough, we have on our statute books laws like the AFSPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which precedes all this by long. We have the Disturbed Areas Act, we have the National Security Act, we have PESA, and we have a plethora of legislation that unfortunately is on our statute books while our being a democracy, which enables law enforcement and agencies and particular governments to target particular political enemies and political dissenters. And that remains a very, very strong concern for human rights defenders, for anybody concerned with decency, civilization, dialogue, and human rights. Friends, There's so much to be said today, and I would like to focus on a particular area which I've been concerned with and working with for the last 32 years, which is the area of discrimination and othering and hate speech. Before I go there, I'd also like to say that among human rights defenders who are today incarcerated, and the ones that man lawyer named, we also have a list of almost 23 very young, very dynamic human rights defender incarcerated because of the February 2020 Delhi pogrom. And we have among them, out of the 23, I think we have almost 19 who happen to be young Muslims who actually came into the fore of leadership and protesting against the Citizenship Amendment Act. And there are women there, there are young women there, Muslim and non-Muslim feminists, who have been deliberately targeted by the state because of the enterprise, clarity, courage that they showed in terms of peaceful protest. Hate speech. And what is the difference between hate speech and free speech is something that not just India needs to know and learn, but I think we can't speak enough about in the India of today. I would not be exaggerating to say that if over the last several decades, 100 years, couple of thousand years, it's the Dalits and the untouchables who have been singularly targeted because of othering and discrimination by a caste order, then for the last 35 years, particularly for the last 40 years, maybe it is the Indian Muslim community, and since the 1990s, the Indian Christian community that has actually been subject to this kind of othering. What does this mean? What does this mean in terms of existence, in terms of social harmony, in terms of human rights, in terms of equality and non-discrimination? I was this afternoon at a discussion where a young Muslim women's group released a book on the discriminatory practices suffered by Muslims during COVID-20 pandemic. And it's very strange and it's very stark that we see that the COVID pandemic lockdown era brought to the fore schisms that were already existent, but brought them up very starkly. Divisions and disparities that already were allowed with impunity were amplified. You had one of our famous writers, Arundhati Roy, talking about how the Corona jihad, quote unquote, phenomenon targeted Indian Muslims in a big way, and that interview goes viral because it's Arundhati Roy saying it. But the question is, will Indian institutions like the Indian judiciary, Indian educational institutions that write textbooks, the Indian law enforcement machinery, which includes the central agencies like CBI, the police, etc., will our institutions look themselves in the eye and talk about the institutional lacunae, the deliberate institutional absence of institutional memory in trying to tackle this creeping and growing hatred and othering? And what am I trying to say by this? I'm trying to say that I was telling these young people today, because I'm now on the other side of the age bracket, I was trying to tell them that yes, social media has amplified things beyond proportion. Yes, the Corona pandemic has taken things beyond proportion. However, we have seen a creeping phenomenon of othering and hate speech against the Indian Muslim community growing with impunity over the last 3 or 4 decades. And our commissions of inquiry into the riots, if you like, I would prefer to call them pogroms, have documented this. They have documented the prejudice of the Indian police force, the communal prejudice, the discriminatory reaction of the forces to when a Hindu mob behaves in a certain way and a Muslim mob behaves in a certain way. And they've also documented how the same law enforcement machinery is extremely quote-unquote soft when it comes to tackling the supremacist Hindutva wing, which is the majoritarian wing, because somehow they seem to conflate that mob with supremacism or nationalism. My question to myself has been, as I studied these reports and I faced this violence and I dealt with it as a journalist and an activist through the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, even before Gujarat, was that How come there was an absence of institutional memory in tackling this? And what does this absence of institutional memory cost us? So I think it's important today to look at the whole issue of hate as media design. And you can look at, for the last 1 year alone, the way electronic media channels, the way digital media platforms were actually manipulated and misused to perpetuate images like corona jihad, the super spreader of the coronavirus being Muslims. Before that, it was something else. And hate as state project under the current regime. And what do I mean as hate as state project? I mean complete deafening silence from the constitutional heads of government, despite such hate letting. Just look at the few weeks or period before February 22 and 23, 2020, when the Delhi violence broke out, program violence broke out. Who was hate letting? You have speakers like Kapil Mishra, Ragini Tiwari, Pushpendra Kulshestra, Home Minister of the country, 2 ministers in the government, speaking a venomous language against the peaceful protesters who are protesting an extremely discriminatory law, which is the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, fearing that, just like Assam, the NPR NRC will be brought in, as was being threatened openly by the executive. And the language was, as was stated on the floors of the Indian Parliament, that this peaceful protest, where the Indian tricolour and the Indian Constitution was in ally in the protest, where Indian Muslims were staking, maybe for the first time I've seen it, where you had Indian Muslim women at the forefront of that protest, actually saying that we are actually staking our claims to citizenship in this country, and our claims are on using the tricolour, using the Constitution, using Baba Saheb Ambedkar, using Bhagat Singh, etc. What was the reaction? What was the reaction of the authorities? And the reaction of the authorities currently in power was one of hatred. And I think it's very, very important, particularly if you look at the jurisprudence that India has thrown up on hate speech over the last 2 or 3 decades, that the Indian constitutional courts have been wary. We've had moments of glory in the Bombay High Court, etc. Suresh Prabhu versus, with the Shiv Sena leader, Suresh Prabhu, and a couple of judgments like that, where hate speech during elections was called out. But by and large, Indian jurisprudence, Indian courts have not really built up a solid jurisprudence in making people understand the difference between hate speech and free speech, and actually drawing that line, which United States has actually done, telling us that there's a big difference between Article 19, which is a freedom of speech, and an abuse of that freedom of speech through hate speech. Because hate speech, when uttered by those people in power, people in positions of power, actually undermines those targeted who are already marginalized, affecting their right to equality and non-discrimination. So while we speak of a host of human rights abuses in this country, and therefore this compendium is a particularly valiant effort, because it talks about the denial of social and political rights, the denial of economic rights, the fish workers, sanitation workers, Anganwadi workers, migrant workers. It talks of a whole spectrum of human rights abuse, particularly exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm particularly focusing on what makes a particular section vulnerable under a regime which is self-proclaimedly supremacist and majoritarian. And therefore, when you have a plethora of electronic media coverage by television channels, I focus on the television channels just now, though we've had digital media platforms also erring in that regard over the last 4 or 5 years. But if I look at the last 1 year alone, and my organization, Citizen for Justice and Peace, has lodged over 6 complaints in the last 1 year alone, with the National Broadcasting Statutory Authority, with the Ministry for Information and Technology, with the Ministry for Information and Broadcasting, saying that we have to understand, does this material not abuse your own guidelines? So I think until we are able to, as a democracy is not about just winning elections, as America has only recently confronted and even shown. January 6th was a lesson for America. We could face that situation anytime in India. that elections are not about just winning an election and about holding the majority vote. A democracy is about governance. A democracy is about equality and non-discrimination. A democracy is about realizing once you've won an election that you represent all your constituents, not just the ones that have voted for you. So how do you make this distinction between just an electoral democracy, stroke a mobocracy, and a constitutional democracy? That is what we are really grappling with in India today. And with a political party firmly in power, no signs of that power or its support declining at present, and no real contestation of that power, we are facing a situation where this distinction between majoritarian democracy, supremacism, and realization of equality and non-discrimination remains a far cry. It would be not right to not speak about the manner in which the Tablighi Jamaat congregation that took place in the middle of March 2020 in the capital of Delhi was so maliciously and so viciously manipulated by the electronic media. And it would be easy for us to call out channels like Z and etc. But when a channel like India Today also actually telecasts for several hours on a night and for 17 days after that, this entire program that it actually started telecasting from April 10th onwards, it becomes part of a political project, which is part of a state project. And many of us who actually work on the ground saw that whether it was North India, whether it was Delhi, whether it was Central India, whether it was parts of Western India and Gujarat and Maharashtra, the impact of this pernicious coverage actually affected people's lives on the ground, where you had vendors who happened to be Muslims, you had shopkeepers who happened to be Muslims, watchmen who happened to be Muslims, bitterly feeling the discrimination. Now, let's come to the citizenship conundrum. That's what I end with. December 9th and 10th and 11th last year, you had the Citizenship Amendment Act being rammed through Parliament at the most spectacular protests we've seen taking place from Delhi and spreading all over the country. But for my organization, Citizens for Justice and Peace, that's been working in Assam for the last 4 years, the citizenship crisis goes back much, much more. I asked myself when we started work and we look at the extremely difficult situation that we are facing on a day-to-day basis in Assam, why we didn't start our work there earlier. It's a long, long story, going back decades. But we are today faced with a situation in the state of Assam, northeastern state of Assam, where 1.9 million people, Assamese of different ethnicities, different religions, face the specter of statelessness. We are faced with a situation of a total of 2.2 million people. Because 1.9 million is through exclusion from NRC and 2.2 million includes the exclusion from the D-voter and declared foreigner process. All these three processes have been arbitrary, have been unconstitutional, violating national and international law. Too complicated to go into just right now, today. But all of this requires attention, detailed attention, support, solidarity, and constant calling out. I just can appeal at this moment to not just the IAMC, but all its friends and all its supporters anywhere, that today all these various rights violations in India require constant calling out, solidarity, and support. What does it mean to be told suddenly overnight, for no fault of your own, that you're not an Indian citizen? It is like a civil death. It means not just not having access to welfare schemes and voting rights, but it means actually that you cease to exist in the eyes of the state. Which means, again, that anything can be done with you and your family. And that's exactly what has been happening in the state of Assam. While politically, undoubtedly, the target was the ethnic Muslim community. As a result of this documentary test of citizenship. Every ethnicity, Bengali Hindus, Rajbanshis, Santals, indigenous people, Gorkhas, all have been affected. Even Hindi-speaking interstate migrants from the rest of India. So we need to be looking at some of these very, very crucial and extremely worrying developments. Even as we speak here today, and many other human rights defenders speak, none of us are sure as to what we will face as a result of this speaking tomorrow or day after. We are actually living through an extremely vindictive regime. So any of us speaking here or on any other platform could be target of a vindictive regime tomorrow or day after. That's the fragility that India faces. And to think that this is India, which is the world's largest democracy, and that we celebrate as such as we must on the eve of our 71st Republic Day is particularly tragic. That Indian democracy is today threatened with being not just a democracy, but probably on the verge of, despite having a constitution on paper, denying the constitutional ideas of equality and non-discrimination to large sections of its own people. We faced a huge tragedy last year when we saw mass exclusion of the interstate and intrastate migrant worker population. 2011 figures talk about that population as being as 45 crores. We don't know what the figure is today. It's a significant section of our population. It's a significant section of our workforce. There is no particular rigor or exercise in registering this population in terms of their work conditions, their health conditions, their fragility, their home conditions, etc. Among this migrant worker population, you have the most marginalized of Indians, which is your Dalit stroke, untouchables, the indigenous people stroke, Adivasis, and Muslims, because there's an intersectionality in all of this. Who are the most economically deprived? Who are the most socially stigmatized? So when we saw this huge mass migration last year and a complete abysmal absence of the state to rise to the occasion and grant some economic package or social welfare package to this section of the population, it was just the culmination of what we are seeing happen. And yet our television channels tell us that there has been no significant rupture in the popularity of the regime. So we are in a very, very tough and dark phase, likely to continue with that tough and dark phase for time to come. Where does that take us in terms of rights violations, in terms of rights protection, in terms of international and national solidarity building? I'm hoping that today's discussions, today's release of this compendium, and the dialogues and discussions that follow will actually help us build those solidarities further and ensure to some extent that some of these issues get alleviated. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Tista, for that. That already known, but trying to highlight the challenges in India for human rights activists, poor, marginalized, almost anybody except who is in the government or have the support of the government. Thank you again for reminding us the dire situation in India. With that, I will invite Ajit to reflect on the presentations and pose some questions to our esteemed panelists.
Yes, thank you, Rashid Saab. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. This is part of the Republic Day special series that we have planned. This is the first of our webinar. The next webinar we have on the 24th, talking on we have some of the top historians going to talk about the role of Muslims in India's history. And then at the end of this month, on the 31st of January, we have a webinar celebrating India's Republic Day and talking about a whole lot of other things connected with the Indian Republic. Thank you, Father Prakash, and thank you, Tista. Unfortunately, Mary Lawler had to go. She had another meeting, and that is why she has already left. She would have stayed on, but she gave a very powerful statement I just want to start by asking Father Prakash a very quick question: is where is exactly is the case, Father Stan Swami's case, and what is the next legal step that is being taken? Do we have any chances of him getting bail? Can you just throw some light on that for our audience here?
See, to tell you honestly, we are meeting very often. We really do not know. We have a top team of lawyers, Bombay-based. There is another group of lawyers in the Supreme Court, and they're dealing not merely with Father Stan Swami's case, but with other cases too. We have made a bail application, yes, and it is still going. Yeah, it's very rare they give someone actually a bail who's arrested under the UAPA. They make them languish in jail for a long time, and it's like a punishment for something that they have never done. So we really don't know. We hope. In fact, I read news report of some of the Catholic leaders have spoke to the Prime Minister yesterday asking about Father Stan, and the Prime Minister, of course, had to tell them, oh, it's not in my hands. There is the judicial or the law and order process and so on. And we take all those things, of course, with a pinch of salt. We know the facts. And basically, there is the powers are behind people in this country who take a stand for human rights, justice, and peace. All of us know what this has gone through all these years, and we are living under a very vindictive regime. So I cannot say anything about Father Stan at this moment because we really don't know. The case is ongoing. We want him to come out on bail, and we really do not know what is going to happen and how long he's going to be in jail.
Right. Tista, just wanted to ask you, Mary Lawler referred to your case, and she said that we had taken up, when in her NGO, they had taken up your case earlier. And you have, of course, for years, for almost 2 decades, you have been connected internationally because of your activism. Your activism in the state of Gujarat following the violence in 2002 brought a lot of prominence to the issues that you were working on. I remember at one point in time, you told me that, oftentimes in the early part of that campaign, you would probably be the only person standing in a court full of, saffron waving members of the Bajrang Dal and other members of the BJP, RSS, VHP. Now, from the state of Gujarat, this has come to the rest of the country, rest of India. Also, at the same time, in the last 2 years, especially since Mr. Modi won re-election, we have seen a lot of international coverage of the religious persecution in India. Do you think that the international community can play a role in helping ameliorate the persecution, the situation of the persecuted minorities in India, the human rights defenders, the social and religious minorities, the marginalized groups? What role do you think that the international community, both governmental as well as the civil society, can play in helping India improve the situation in India?
Well, I think there's no question, Ajit, that international support at various levels, whether it is the groups in civil society or whether it's intragovernmental, that it is needed and much more, and it's needed more and more. I don't think we can ever say that it's not important to have that support. I think it is very important. We live in a global world. We live in a global world where there's so much intersectionality, interconnectivity, that we need to have that support. So many of us are not confused on the fact that, yes, we need to do what we can to garner that support. Having said that, given my experience of the last 2.5, 3 decades, I remain quietly skeptical as to how far that support goes and how deep that support goes, only because you also realize that India is a huge market. India has a huge commercial interest for the Western powers and many other powers, even in the Far East. So while there may be a concern about human rights, and we should push that, and we should push that space and envelope all the time, there at some point is always the kind of conflict between that and the economic interests of the governments and the associations that want to actually engage with the commercial aspect of the Indian market. So that is a conflict. But however, that doesn't mean one shouldn't attempt it. One should try it. I mean, one of the important examples I like to keep giving is that, there is no question that the last 7 years have been the worst that India has seen in terms of human rights and minority rights and constitutional rights, etc. But let's also face the fact that India has not had a very good international human rights record even before that. And I'm saying that because, it's not because I want to sound for moral equivalence, but to kind of look at things in a more, in a perspective. Because I've been engaged with Physicians for Human Rights, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and I know for long before you had the Hindutva supremacist right wing in power, you never could find the Indian government allowing, for instance, the Physician for Human Rights to come to India. Now, why? I mean, why would you not allow such a visit? And the reason I'm raising this very technical question, because I'm a human rights practitioner, is that for many of us who worked in communal violence situations, and I've done so since 1983, Bhiwandi and Bombay, long before Gujarat, is that you see the failure of the medico-legal professional. You see the failure of the medico-legal professional in maintaining an autonomy and independence in terms of recording of injury, recording of stuff, which makes it possible to conflate and reduce the evidence against the powerful perpetrator. Now, it means how you write your postmortem report, how you write your forensic reports, how you write all of this. If that medico-legal professional is going to be under the pressure of local law enforcement and not observe their own ethics and human rights, we were asking all these questions all the time, that why can't there be an ethic in this country where the medico-legal professional resists that pressure from law enforcement? Now, these are tiny issues, but actually they are the major issues, because when you're talking about human rights protection, it's the process of law, it is the procedure of law that actually enforces human rights. And it is that procedure and process of law that we've completely given a go-by to in the Indian context for years and for decades. It's just much, much worse now. You're muted, Ajit.
Father Prakash, a lot has been, we have seen that the Indian government has gone after the Indian Muslim community. The Citizenship Amendment Act, the Article 370 that Muhammad Jawad, the National General Secretary, referenced in his opening remarks, the beef laws, the love jihad laws, on just one day, I think it was 19th or 20th of December 2019, the police killed 20 Muslims in just one day, in 2019, in the protesting against the Citizenship Amendment Act. At the same time, there's a lot of persecution going on of the Indian Christian community also, who are roughly about 3 million in India. 30 million in India, a small community. Can you throw some light on how, because very little of it is reported internationally, can you throw some light on how the Indian government, the various state governments, how the legal structure, how do they target and persecute the Indian Christians?
There are two things we need to look at, Ajit. One is, as you have said, the fact is, at the receiving end are definitely the Muslims as a minority, and anybody who's the tribals, the Dalits, the poor, because of the fact that they're poor. Now, there is something about the Christian community in India which we have, which is like a buffer. We have had education, we have had our institutions, and many of those who today belong, and we need to be ashamed of them, like the current president of the BJP, have been educated either in Jesuit schools or in Christian schools, many of them who are there. So what is happening here is you run with a hare and hunt with a hound. Just say now in Goa, in the last few days, the Sangh Parivar has gone to an old church from where we had a saint, Saint Joseph Vaz, who went to Sri Lanka and so on. And they have started doing puja there, saying that here on the premises of the church, the church was built on a temple. And they started doing puja and so on. And there are lots of these things happening when prayer meetings of smaller Christian denominations and so on are disturbed. People are being beaten up, falsely accused of so-called forced conversion. And the point is, by the love jihad is definitely targeted against the Muslims. There are instances, say in Kerala, where we have had a recent issue of a mixed marriage, a Muslim man and a Christian girl, and all hell broke loose, even from within the church hierarchy, which is unfortunate. The point is, where we have to, among the minorities, and very particularly among the Christians, we really do not have that unity in order to create an issue. When we had that attack on the Dangs and so on, here in Gujarat, the Prime Minister came rushing, Vajpayee, at that time, and we definitely internationalized it. So here they do what we would call, just as there is strong Hindutva and soft Hindutva, they do strong targeting against the Muslims and maybe a kind of soft targeting, because many of them are there in the United States. I'm not sure how many are listening to this webinar. Okay, many of them would be supporters of the Sangh Parivar here. And once you internationalize the fact that Christians are being targeted, definitely is not as much as the Muslim. But who told you that Christians do not eat beef? Okay, they very, very clearly target the certain sections where you have a lot of Muslims, whereas in the Northeast they say you're allowed to eat beef. Even in Goa, they're permitting it's there is a lot of hypocrisy in the agenda, which actually targets also the Christians, but also not as much as the Muslims. But the fact is the Christians are being targeted, and I think personally we have to make much greater noise about what is happening to the Christians of India today.
So Ajit, we have 3 minutes before we could finish. You're on mute.
Right. So, no, we are done. I hand it back to you because for your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Ajit, and thank you, Father Prakash and Tista. Again, thank you again for all your help you provided in preparing this compendium. That was much appreciated. And we hope all the listeners download the link that Jawad provided in the chat of the compendium and share it widely with your networks, but more specifically with the policymakers, your congressperson, your media, even it doesn't have to be limited to congresspersons. Please share with your local mayor, local trustee, local councilman, anybody you know. That would be appreciated. Don't limit it to just Indian American community or South Asian community. This needs to be known. This is an education about human rights, which is a global commitment to all nations, to all human beings, all humanity. So please go ahead and share this actively with your local politicians, local media, as well as congressional staff and congresspersons. So with that, I thank you again, everybody, and we will see you all again soon. Thank you. Thank you, Jawad.
Good. Thank you, Rashid. Thank you, Jawad. Thank you, Ajit.
Thank you.
And
Thanks
all
so
at
much.
IAMC.